Hi, I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. So after last week's hiatus, we are back. We have 2 weeks of data, but obviously we'll talk about last week, or I should say 2 weeks ago, but we're really going to focus on what happened last week and what does that mean going forward. We really want to look, now that we're getting into July, coming up to that pivotal kind of peak July 4th weekend, what does that mean going forward? And so in the first segment, we want to look at crude draws, refined product builds, what are some of the shifts that we're seeing around the world, but obviously also what is happening within the US. In segment 2, we really want to talk about product demand and how we're going to close out the summer. Because one of the key things that we've been saying is that demand was just going to flatline. Like we weren't going to get this seasonal bump, because demand destruction in the US is not just, oh, we're going to go down 1 million barrels. No, we just don't go up. We just stay sideways. And it's the income curve, if you will. So people who don't fly drive, and people who normally drive do less. So you just get that replacement factor as you go down that income curve, if you will, on the gasoline front, and then obviously that also impacts the jet fuel side as it cascades down. It's the diesel though that is really going to be the pivot, because gasoline was had its spits and starts in with some peaks and some valleys last year, but diesel really carried the torch in 2021, and we're just not seeing that in 2022. It's still above historics, but nowhere near where it was in 2021, and we think that is going to continue to get worse as we continue to see this slowdown in activity on for those that watch our Econ show. We talk about some of that bullwhip and some of those adjustments as inventories have spiked, spending has slowed. And then in the last segment, we're going to do the physical crude markets and the shifting OSPs, or official selling price, because the physical crude market is, some places are very tight, other places are very loose, and we want to look at how is that shifting the official selling price and what is that going to do going forward, because realistically, we should see Saudi Arabia have the ability to raise prices again by about $2. But what is that going to do to Russian crude? What is that going to do to West African crude and the different crude grades? So we really want to hone in on some of those key pieces. Now, before we get started, we wanted to just talk for a moment on what is happening in Libya. And for those that follow me on Twitter, you're going to know that this is something that we've been tweeting out. This is a person that we follow, and I'm just pulling up his name right now just so I can give the credit where credit is due. It's Chris Steven, who's and his handle is @ReportingLibya. And he's always using this chart, and I think it's a great way to really define what is happening. So now there's been a force majeure declared at Cedar and Ras Lanuf. So you can see that obviously those are the two largest areas in terms of exports, and that is going to hinder some of these different pieces. So the NLC will close those two ports in the Gulf Thursday unless protests end. So obviously that is tomorrow. So we're already seeing those issues. Two other ports that are in blue are already closed since April 18th because of protests. The NOC hasn't given production figures, but so right now we can assume, based on what we've seen, that they're producing about 700,000 barrels, which is, obviously they've been exporting close to between 1.1, 1.2. So that is going to slow things down. And then obviously as you have more rollbacks, that's going to put a hindrance on the amount of capacity that can actually go out. So realistically, they should be able to maintain about 450 to 500,000 barrels a day based on what is currently open. But that's going to leave Europe scrambling, because they're not taking Russian crude. They're now not going to have Libyan crude. Well, where do you go and replace these barrels, which has moved them further into West Africa? We've seen an increase in terms of Angolan purchases, Nigerian. So when we'll talk about West Africa in segment 3 in terms of some of the shifts, but I think this is going to be some of those key pieces when you're looking at Libya. Now, another component that has become a problem, and I've had these conversations, for those that have known me for a while, have been going back to 2014, I was adamant about when Made in China 2025 came out, and China said that they were going to build these massive facilities, and by massive facilities, I'm talking refiners and petchem. And, they're going to really carry the torch in terms of new refining capacity. Now, there's several problems in that, which we had highlighted back then. It's, do you want to rely on China to provide you with the refined products that you're going to lose, or the ability to make yourself in your own nation? And are you going to trust their build quality? Are you going to trust the fact that there's not going to be a lot of downtime, or industrial accidents? Because, what is the scale and scope and really quality of work that they're going to do versus what we would require in other areas, which is going to create some of those issues. So China has cut planned volumes of gasoline and diesel exports, which is a problem. They're cutting diesel and gasoline exports, and that was the market was relying, and we had been seeing more and more of it coming to market. And this is happening for several reasons. And the reasons are, there is a shortage of refined capacity at the state-owned level, the state-owned refiners, because they've had to cut runs due to unplanned maintenance, scheduled maintenance. So they're concerned about, if demand keeps running, are they going to have enough? Teapots or the Shandong refiners are operating at about 65%, while the state-owned guys, who should be at about 85%, are actually at about 70%. And there's some of that concern, which is hindering some of these gasoline and diesel flows, especially on the diesel front, which is pinning a lot of these cracks to the highs, which, again, we're going to talk about in segment 3 when we look at what's happening in Asia. Just to give you an idea, and we talked about this in the FSC show, but I think it's important to look at where some of these refiners are coming on. So Saudi Arabia, 400,000 barrels, Kuwait, 615,000, Oman, 230,000, Iraq is upgrading, and then there's 2 others there, and then Bahrain in Sitra. So when you look at when is it coming on, so Al Zour in Kuwait ramps in the coming weeks, 600,000 barrels a day. Linjiang in China was 320,000 barrels a day, has started to ramp already. Rapid in Malaysia, 300,000 already started up. And TTE restarted in the Donges, TTE restarted Donges in April. So you've gotten some of this, but when we look holistically, you have refiners in the Middle East, broken down here, will process 8.8 million barrels a day in 2023, which is about 1 million barrels a day above 2019 levels, which should compensate for Europe as well as some of the lost capacity. And when we talk about Europe, you also have to think about the East Coast or the Atlantic Basin in general. The problem is, are they going to be on time? They're going to go to the highest bidder. So what is India going to do? What is Asia going to demand? So you're relying that, in order to ensure you get the volumes, you may have to bid up. And that, again, opens up some more opportunity. Yes, it's closer than China. A lot of these are being built by U.S., European entities. So there's a certain amount of build quality that and redundancy that you would expect. But so those issues shouldn't be the case. But what about China? And yes, they may be built properly, but we've seen Iran launching, and the Houthis launching attacks from Yemen into Saudi Arabia, into the UAE. So even though their build quality is great, so we're not going to have these industrial accidents and things, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a missile attack or a drone attack that could also cause damage and disruption. So these are things to consider when we're talking about the refined product market on a global footprint, not just in the U.S. So speaking on the global footprint, here you can see the crude loadings at the different levels. OPEC ex West Africa is that orange piece. You can see that has gone up, and that's why it's going to be important, because we're going to talk about production, because production has fallen by about 5, in terms of what the different levels are. And we want to look at how production has fallen, but who is driving that drop, which is mostly West Africa, as Russia has been able to maintain to a degree, but it's all going in, well, I should say a large part of it is now going into the floating market, which is why we do expect the increase in floating in crude in transit and crude on the water, which you can see here, because this is looking at exports on the water. Now, another nice little fun knock-on impact from Russia-Ukraine. Crude loadings at the second mooring, and this is the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal, will resume July 1st. For those that don't remember or missed it, on June 28th, they found a sea mine that was there, so they shut down. So there was planned maintenance already at mooring 1. Mooring 2 then had a sea mine, which is obviously a huge problem, but then mooring 3 is still operational. So right now they have said that loadings will on 2 are going to reopen July 5th, and then mooring 1 was already scheduled to come back by the middle of July. It should be a little bit earlier because they're saying that it should be July 1st now. So you should have July 1st mooring 1, July 5th mooring 2, and mooring 3 has been continuous, which will help alleviate some issues when you look at some of the Libya shortfalls. But again, this is something that is going to take time, and there could be an errant mine showing up again. So this is going to be something to watch as well. Now, the shifting markets continue. Half of Russia's seaborne crude is heading to Asia, up from 1/3 before its invasion of Ukraine. Not surprising. That's something that's going to continue. And as we've heard some of the different pieces, you have to think about, pricing. Well, prices have been free. I mean, this is just showing what is on the screens, but we know that crude has crossed closer to $40 to $42 below dated Brent. The problem is, the G7 wants to cap the amount of price that they can get. And so if you want to cap the price, China and India would be happy to pay less. And the way that they want to do it is by impacting insurance and, the ships that can move the crude. But there's ways around that as well. China, India could issue their own insurance using their central banks. Not that you would trust it, but Russia could issue their own insurance. They may waive letters of credit or LOCs that are needed to get the crude. There are different things that can happen, but again, the workarounds are many, and it's just they take time. So you will get an impact, but just as Iran has gotten around things, there will be the workaround to try to maintain this. But again, cheaper crude is going to be the benefit of everybody at this point, especially the Asian countries. Now, one of the things, and we've talked about the economy on the economy show, we've talked about the macro economy. Hopefully for those that have been following us, you kind of see what we're doing in terms of connecting what happens in energy, how important it is as a driver, but also impacted by what is happening in the macro backdrop. And here you can see that we should have seen a fairly sizable increase in July-August loadings, but in terms of cargoes, given the shortfalls and the issues that we had with the China lockdowns. But on the Econ show, we've been talking about that bullwhip impact where we've had a huge build in inventories. We've had a fairly sizable decline in retail activity, which has increased the amount of inventory. So as inventories build, there's just no need to go out and buy more stuff. So that is showing up on the West Coast right now, where you can see that there is a fairly sizable drop in terms of where we were versus the previous year versus the previous week. You're getting the slowdown in July. Now, it's important to understand it's still above normal. It's just well off of those insane highs that we had in 2021, which again created that bullwhip, created those inventory builds because you were building inventory as the retail consumer was slowing, which is what we started to talk about as we got into June, July. And we were predicting that it was going to start to show up in the data as we got into September, October, and then it accelerated to the downside. And here we are today. So now when we start looking at the U.S., here you can see that there was a draw of 2.76 million barrels. That's 88.2 million below the 5-year. And a lot of that, again, remains within PADD 2 and Cushing. PADD 2 down 1.29 million, 34 million below the 5-year. But again, it's more along the lines, it's below the normal in general. PADD 3 down 810,000 barrels, 17.3 million below the 5-year. But they're very kind of stable, if you will. There's nothing, if you want to look at a position, PADD 2 is one that is more interesting versus PADD 3, because PADD 3, even though it shows it's far below the 5-year average, 2020 throws that off. So you have to look at it holistically to say, okay, well, where should it be and pad 3 is in a very comfortable position, while pad 2, which is why we do think that's going to bring more imports down from Canada. Now, when we look at a pad 5, again, fairly lumpy, but fairly stable, we do expect to see a bit more imports coming in. And then when you factor in the SPR, there was a drop of 9.71 million as barrels continue to get sold from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Crude oil production up 100,000 barrels to 12.1 million. For those that have been following us, we're still at about 12.09 and change. So we're right around there. We're probably just a touch below. We do expect to be at about 12.15 by the time we get to about the middle of July, just given where activity is and as some of these wells turn on. So again, we expect to be at that exit rate of about 12.2 million barrels a day. This is putting us right in position. We should see a little bit of that production growth, but again, the push is really going to be as we get into that August, September, with the work continuing through July, August, September, and October, seeing that final push to get us to that extra little cushion. Now, when we look at runs were up by 1%, that's 402,000 barrels a day. As you can see, that was all done by pad 3 with 445,000 barrels a day of additional capacity coming online or increasing utilization. As we were saying, for those that have been following us, we said that pad 3 was going to be the driver, and here it is. And we just expect now, for those that have been following us, we've been saying that we were going to stay between that 91% to 93% as we got into the end of June, and then we should push a little bit harder as we got into July. And here you can see that it was pulled forward a bit. So, and a lot of this is being driven by the middle distillate crack, the diesel crack. So here is where we're getting some of these nice increases in runs. And as you can see, we've been here before. 2018 was higher, but we are very much at the top end of the utilization rate. Now, the problem is you're looking at utilization rates, which is just a percentage. You're not looking at the actual volume in terms of crude coming on, because we have taken refiners offline. So even though we're at a higher utilization rate, it doesn't mean we're at a higher volume rate. And so that's some of the backdrops, which is why it's because we've shuttered refiners, we've taken things offline. And so we're running at a fairly